So what we have here is a rural landscape scene in northern Montana. This photograph was taken at daybreak, just as the sun was coming up. A small red shed caught my eye. You can tell that the foreground is shadowed, so we're going to work on that in Photoshop, along with a few other things to see if we can get this photograph ready for public view. I opened it first in Adobe Camera Raw because it is a raw file. I photographed it with my Canon 5D Mark II, which I no longer own, and this digital negative is probably about 7 years old. So let's get to work. First thing I'm going to do is adjust the exposure, concentrating on the background more than the foreground, because I don't want to overexpose the highlights. So I'm going to go in and do a levels adjustment first, moving the line over to the right side of the mountain of pixels on the histogram, and doing the same thing on the left side. I'm then going to cheat a little bit and use these sliders here to open up the shadows as best I can without overdoing it, and dialing back the highlights just a smidge so that we can retain some of the color in the pixels. You'll also see there's a lot of blue in the snow here, and we'll fix that a little bit later. I'm also going to try to colorize this grass here so it's a little bit more yellow. Once I'm comfortable with the exposure and the contrast, which is affected by using these controls here. I mean, the more white and the more black you add to a scene, the more contrast you produce. I'm going to go into the color sliders and change some of the key colors that we have here. The most obvious one is the red here, which appears a little orange. So we're going to first work on the luminance of it, open it up a little bit, open up the shadows in the red. I'm going to dial back the saturation just a bit because Canon's cameras like to overdo red saturation. And I'm going to play with the hue just a smidge and make it a little less orange and a little more magenta, if that makes sense. Then I'm going to go into the oranges, and I think I'm going to open those up as much as I can without losing color. Increase the saturation so they look more orange, and the hue is probably about where I want it. Then I'm going to go in the blues, and I'm going to see if there's a difference between the aquas and the blues here. I want to darken the blue so the blue really sticks out in the sky. Problem, if I go too far to the right, you'll see that it also accentuates the blues here in the foreground. So I'm going to do this just to take care of the sky, and we'll take care of the blues in the foreground a little bit later. And there really aren't any other predominant colors here. If you slide green all the way to right, there's no greens. There's going to be some yellows, but not much. Aquas. Aqua's in the mid-tones here below the sky. I like to keep the gradient, so I'm going to open those up just a smidge. There shouldn't be any purples, really, except in the background there on the horizon. And there aren't much for magentas either. Now, I'm going to warm the scene a little bit. Just a smidge, not a whole lot. I think that the purple, the tint on it is about right. I'm not going to mess with that. Clarity, I like to add a little bit of clarity, but I don't want to go too much because if you zoom in at 100%, you'll see this introduces a lot of noise. I usually leave those other controls alone too. I also go in here and I dial back all sharpening. You'd think it would be intuitive to add sharpening, make a photograph look more sharpened, but you'll find that if you use these photos for stock photo sales or for magazines or other things like that, the more sharpening you add, the more noise you introduce, and they'd rather have a dull image with no noise and less sharpening than a sharp image with too much noise. I'm going to also dial back the noise on this a little bit, as every photograph has a little bit of noise, but you want to maintain the detail. There's not a whole lot in here. You want to look at a noise at 100% or 200%. There's a little bit of noise in there, not much. So we'll just increase this a smidge because you don't want to go too far, otherwise you lose detail like in the leaves. Color, you can boost that up. Generally, you're not going to lose too much detail by affecting the color noise in an image. Then I didn't see any lens flares or fringing on this image, but we're going to look at it close, and there isn't any. You're going to see it typically in the high contrast areas of a photo, so we don't have to affect that. And the other one I like to use is the dehaze tool. This may not be the perfect photograph for that, but I still will play with it nonetheless. Just to see, it'll add some contrast. I'll keep an eye on this histogram here. If it squashes the histogram too much, I'm using it too much. A little bit of it's working well, so we'll add a little bit, but this isn't the perfect image for using that particular tool. So now I've completed the work that I want to use in Adobe Camera Raw, and I'm going to open it up in Photoshop. Now the first thing I'm going to do is I want to open up the shadows in the foreground. You'll see that the shadow line runs approximately below, right at this grass line. There's a shadow here, which is probably me, on the edge of the road making the photograph, and it runs pretty much along this edge through here. So the first thing I'm going to do is grab my my tool here. It's a polygonal hexagonal lasso tool, and then I'm going to just roughly, you don't have to be too precise, grab the shadow areas as best you can. Again, you don't have to be too precise with the method that I use to fix things like this, except on horizons. There you want to be a little bit more careful. Then I'm going to adjust the edge of my selection, and that includes adding a lot of feathering to the edge, and then shifting the edge just a little bit. That's a little bit too much feather. Maybe add a little contrast, which will tighten up the edges of what you selected. And dial back the feather just a little bit more. Oops, I need a little bit more. You don't want it too precise, and then we're going to go OK. Now the first thing I'm going to do is that we'll open up the shadows in the snow is by decreasing the blues. So I'm going to grab my saturation tool here. I'm going to grab blues, and I'm going to decrease the saturation of the blues. The problem is you go too far, you'll notice that the blue is also hiding in the grass. So what are we going to do? We're going to go and try to grab, well, first I'm going to undo those changes. I'm going to go grab my Camera Raw filter. One second here, I got to figure this out. Go to Filter, Camera Raw filter, and we're going to play with it in here. Let's first of all add some temperature to the foreground, which will introduce some oranges into the grass, which is where we need it. It also looks a little green on the tint side. I'll move that to the right. We're going to try to add saturation to the oranges so the grass tries to stick out as much as possible, as well as the reds, because there's going to be reds in here too, and the yellows. And then we're going to dial back any blues a little bit that might exist in the snow. Click OK. So you'll see that it opened up those shadows quite nicely, but still not perfect. So we're going to reselect that area, do a levels adjustment, and you'll see that the histogram has the marker for the highlights way over on the right. So let's move that over to the left a little bit more so it meets the mountain of pixels. Let's add some contrast by moving in the shadow slider a little bit to the right. And I'll tweak with the midtones just a bit to make sure that the snow has enough detail in it. Okay, so I'm going to merge those two layers. You can see my shadows pretty much disappeared in that grass there. It's not bad. So now we are going to, I want to see if I can grab the grass in the shadow areas and just tweak that a little bit more. So first I'm going to do is grab this area, and then I'm going to go to Select, Color Range, Highlights. Now it should grab, what you want to do is to grab the snow. I'm changing the fuzziness, and you can see in this little thing here, I want to grab the white in the snow, but not the grass. Now click OK, and we'll see it pretty much did that. So now I'm going to go to Select and Inverse, and it's going to grab the grass now. Problem is it also grabbed the stuff that's up above here, so we're going to grab, again, the polygonal lasso tool, hold down the Alt key, and deselect the portion of grass that's already got plenty of sunlight and the rest of the photo. So now I pretty much have the grass areas in the foreground, and we're going to try to play with that a little bit. First, adjusting the exposure just a smidge. I dial back a little bit. And then I am going to grab, reselect that again, filter, camera raw filter, and I'm going to add some color into it even more again. Now it looks like this area is also getting color, but it's not. It's just the way this filter works. It's only adding color to the areas where I have made a selection. And I'm going to adjust the hue. See if I can get it to more closely match the oranges in the background. Click OK. Select, deselect, and dial back a little bit. And we've done a lot better than where we were. Where were we? Control, merge, we were here. So you can see that really opened up that a little bit. I'm going to dial back the opacity a little bit more because, again, too much is never good. All right, so that's where we are now. I'm going to flatten that. I'm going to change my crop. I do everything pretty much in a 2:3 aspect ratio, which is the natural size of the sensor on the camera. I'm going to play with the rule of thirds just a little bit, but not too much. You can go overboard with the rule of thirds, so just, don't make it precise. If you make it precise, you kind of look like an amateur. It kind of shows you that you're following exactly the rule of thirds. You actually get a little bit more attention on a photograph if it's just a little bit off. I want to maintain this grass in this lower left-hand corner, so I'm going to go there. My center point is right here. I'm going to want to center it on that tree in the background. So I'm going to pull that in just a little bit, pull it up. That's about as good as I'm going to get. And you notice I could have put that barn in this intersection here, the rule of thirds, but I chose not to. Again, I don't want to follow it exactly. I think that's a sign of amateurism. It helps to know the rules before you can break them, but that's where we are with that photograph now. Now you'll notice that I left a little bit of the white edge here. That's easily fixed. If you go to Edit, Transform, Warp, you can grab this and just move it over just a smidge, and it really doesn't affect the photo too much. Click Enter, and then that white edge that I exposed is gone. There might be a little bit up here in the corner, in which case I just grab this and I color it up. Now I want to clean up the blue a little bit. There's a trick to do this by going into your channels palette, grabbing the blue channel, copying it, hitting Control L, and then moving these so that you make the up here the blues perfectly white and the foreground as black as you possibly can be. And there we go. And then if you hit Control, hold down your Control key and click on this, it's grabbing all the highlight areas. So then I'm going to grab my selection tool here, my marquee tool. I'm going to hold down the Alt key, and I'm going to get rid of the whites that were selected in the foreground. And I'm going to get rid of this copy. I'm going to go back into layers, and you see it did a pretty good job of grabbing the blues. You might have to clean it up just a little bit. Now, you're probably asking, why do I want to go into the sky? What do I have to do in the sky? Well, depending on your camera, you'll find that you'll get a lot more noise and muddling in the sky. And so I like to go in there and I like to clean that up and reduce the noise there even more. And if you increase the luminous noise reduction, in this case I think to about 20, and then reduce the clarity just a smidge, you'll have perfect gradient, especially if you're editing at 16-bit file. If you set it up so you're only editing at 8-bit, this doesn't matter too much because you're going to get gradients in your sky and lines, weird lines and stuff and smudges. So you should try to always edit in 16-bit format if you can. And there I just cleaned up the sky. Now, I like to double check contrast based on what the computer says. I don't usually follow it, but I'm always interested to know what the computer thinks. And so I'll grab the contrast adjustment layer and I'll click Auto, and I'll see what it says that my contrast should be. And it says that I should boost my contrast to 37 and my brightness to 4. That seems like a bit much. Well, maybe not too much. But so I'll dial this back to maybe 15, brightness to 2, and kind of cut it in half almost. And click the eyeball on this layer, and we'll go back and forth and see what I like. And that's good. Now, I still don't like the foreground here a little bit. I want to liven it up just a bit. I'm trying to think about what to do. I'm going to grab the foreground again. I'm going to select and mask, adjust the edges. And I'm going to think about this and see what we can do to clean this up. So I'm going to look at a cooling filter, Maybe introduce just a little bit more blue back into the image. Here, I did a cooling filter where I added just a little bit more blue back in there so it didn't look so sterile. I dialed it back all the way to 20%. I like how that looks. And now this is where I'll get into doing some minor cleanups. I think the devil is in the detail and things that distract the eye, like this little black smudge here, I think distracts the eye, and I'll clean up just little things that kind of take away from your eye reference here and make it kind of bumpy. Again, you want somebody to look at this to kind of be drawn to the barn, and the more bumpy, the more clutter there is in an image, I think is bad for the viewer. So I'll go in and clean up some of these things that are just, they don't materially add anything to the photograph. And once I've done that, the last thing I want to do is clean up the barn a little bit. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to grab the reds portions of the barn. I'm going to grab and change the selection just a little bit. You never want it to be unfeathered, or seldom I should say, because then you can see your edit lines very clearly. And I'm going to change the exposure on this just a smidge. That's good. And this is where I get into a little bit of trickery. You always want to have your own style in editing photographs. You can go ahead and copy mine if you want, but because I know my editing style better than you do, you'll never be able to match mine better than I can do my own. So you're much better going off and kind of developing your own methods. And I'm going to show you how to kind of add your own little tweak to it. One of the things I like to do is going into this little adjustment layer. It's a color lookup table. And I'll go and grab what's called 3-strip look. And you can see that it really oversaturates stuff, but I'll dial this back down to 15 to 20%. And it makes the colors just pop a smidge. And then I go into filter. Alien Skin has a product called Exposure X. Now I don't use a lot of the features that are in this. I use just the ones I want to use to add my kick or my flair to an image. And I'll go to the color film slide tool and I'll play with these top 4 ones here mostly to see which ones I like best. And I like that one the best. I'm going to dial back the opacity a little bit. I always turn off the grain. I don't like it when it adds grain. And that darkens it just a smidge. Dialing the opacity of that back to 80%. And the last thing I'm going to do is add a little bit of sharpening, not a lot. It's the last thing I do. And I use Alien Skin to do this. I like to use a high pass overlay filter. But I found that for whatever reason, this method here adds the least amount of grain into the shadows, and I'm trying to avoid having noise and grain added to an image. Noise, I should say, not grain. Grain is a byproduct of analog film, but noise. And so I'm going to go and dial this back to 50%. Add a little bit of sharpening because it's my older camera, so it could use a little bit more boost in the sharpening. I'm going to go in here and look at it and make sure there's no noise that's appearing anywhere. And there really isn't, but it sharpens it up kind of nicely. I'm going to dial back just a smidge, a little bit more. And I'm going to collapse my image. I'm going to look at things at 100% to make sure there's no dust spots. Here I noticed a little bush peeking up over the horizon. We're going to take care of that. And we're going to go through the sky and just be absolutely sure there are no dust spots. There's one right there. You may not be able to see it on your computer monitor, but I can. If you want to, a neat little trick to help dust spots stick out better, if you go to adjustments, grab your level adjustments, and then increase the contrast dramatically so you're not blowing out the highlights, and then zoom in, grab the layer you want to make the adjustments to, zooming at 100%. There's a little dust spot that's hiding there. The average person probably wouldn't see it. There's one right there I missed. There's one right there I missed. And that's just about it. And then you delete this layer because you don't want it to look like that. And then the last thing I noticed as I was editing is I didn't like this little snow thing here. So I'm going to clone that out. Again, that's personal preference. It looks just kind of out of place. And then I'm going to soften my brush for the edge. And I'm going to grab my soft tool and just clean up the edges a little bit. And it's a little light in there, so I'm going to grab my circle, change the edge, adjustments, low adjustments, add a little shadow back in there so it doesn't look so obvious, flatten it, and it looks good. And there we have it. I'm going to take the reds, unsaturate them just a bit. A little much. And there we have the photo, the original one. I'll pull it up here after I save it. File, save as, TIFF. And it's saving it to my network storage server, which takes a little bit longer. And then we'll pull up the old file, which is right here. So that was a previous file. Here's a previous file. And there's where we are now. So for now, that's all there is, and I'll probably be doing these periodically, so check back often. Have a great day.